Allers with I'm the Assistant Deputy Director of the Financial Quality Assurance Unit for the Child Support Bureau. I'm here with Cynthia Longest, who is the State 4D Director, and also somewhere in here is Lisa Smith, who is the Supervisor. Oh, there she is. Supervisor of the Financial Quality Assurance team. We are with the Child Support Bureau, and the Child Support Bureau is the agency that administers child support enforcement in Indiana. And what I'm going to do is, you have a nice handout there that has a lot of detail, a lot of information. I'm going to go over it very quickly and kind of from a high level, just give a summary of what Title 4D is and what the auditor's role is with it. And honestly, most of it, the role with 4D deals with the 4D agencies in the county. It's going to be the clerk, the court, and the prosecutor. But the auditor does have a role, and we'll kind of go through that briefly. Title 4D refers to Title 4D of the Social Security Act, and that deals with child support enforcement. Now, each county performs child support enforcement duties already. Either the prosecutor, which establishes paternity and enforces orders, the clerk, which still accepts some payments and also enters court order information into the ISET's computer system, or the 4D court, if the county has one, that hears 4D related cases. Each county is already performing these duties, and under federal law, the county is entitled to a reimbursement for expenses that it incurs enforcing child support orders. There are three main funding sources from Title 4D that hit the county. That's the way I usually try to look at it and explain it to people. There is monthly Title 4D reimbursements of direct expenses. There are annual indirect cost reimbursement expenses that the county can have. And then there's also incentive funds. The first two, the monthly reimbursements and the annual reimbursements, are under a program called Federal Financial Participation, or FFP. And under FFP, counties are, as I said before, are entitled to a reimbursement for expenses that they incur enforcing child support orders. And those expenses would be wages and fringes and supplies and all that sort of thing that the clerk, prosecutor, and court incur in their normal activities that they provide. Now, offices to be enrolled under federal financial participation, offices have to file a cooperative agreement with the Child Support Bureau. It's essentially a contract. It's a 2-year agreement that enrolls you in this program and allows you to claim monthly reimbursements. As I said, the monthly reimbursements are direct expenses. So they are expenses that the clerk, prosecutor, or court are directly incurring out of their own budgets for the work that they do providing child support enforcement. So that would be the wages of the people providing that service, the supplies that they're using in that process, etc. The clerk, prosecutor, and court calculate those each month and submit a reimbursement claim to the state. And under FFP, they're entitled to 66% reimbursement of those eligible 4D expenses coming back. Now, this is all done basically at the clerk and the prosecutor and the court level. Auditor doesn't really have a lot to do with that. But what the auditor does have something to do with is when the reimbursements come back into the county, they come with a remittance notice from Department of Child Services or from CSB, and the remittance notice says, hey, this is where this money is coming from, this is why you're getting it, this is how much it is, and this is where it goes. So whenever these reimbursements, these monthly 4D reimbursements come in, a remittance notice will follow and say, hey, this is where the money goes, and it's the auditor's responsibility to make sure it gets there. The annual cost allocation plan is another plan where reimbursements to the county can be received. And these are called indirect reimbursements or indirect costs, whereas the monthly was direct expenses that they're getting reimbursed for actual work that they do. The annual and indirect cost plan gets reimbursements to the county for expenses that benefit the clerk and the prosecutor and the court, but they're paid from somewhere else. So utilities would be a good example. IT expenses, security expenses, liability insurance, those would be the type of administrative or overhead costs that a county incurs. Some of those can be allocated to clerk, prosecutor, and court. That creates an indirect 4D eligible reimbursement. And then, am I hitting something on there? I'm sorry. And then those reimbursements can come back to the county as well. Usually, this isn't something the auditor calculates. Every county has a vendor that prepares this. There's a software that does all these calculations and allocations and whatnot. And once the 4D eligible expenses are determined, they're submitted again to the state, and when they're approved, they're reimbursed to the county quarterly. These indirect costs are reimbursed to the county quarterly, and again, the auditors will receive a remittance notice that describes, hey, this is where this revenue comes from, indirect cost recovery, this is the amount, and this is where it goes. The third and final revenue stream that comes in, as I like to call it, for 4D for the counties, is different than the FFP. The FFP, as I mentioned before, is reimbursement for expenses incurred by the county. Incentive funds are different. It's a separate federal reimbursement that comes in to the state. And states compete with each other for this money. And there's, on the first page of your handout, there are 5 factors listed up near the top that the states compete with each other on those 5 factors to determine who gets what portion of the incentive money. And so once incentive money comes into the state, Child Support Bureau, our department, takes about 22.2% of it, but the remainder of it goes back to the counties, and it goes to the counties in 3 separate funds. There's a prosecutor incentive fund, a clerk incentive fund, and a Title 4D incentive fund. And so the county, and those amounts are transferred into the county on a quarterly basis from the incentive, from the state. And those incentive funds can be spent by the prosecutor, clerk, and a court if they also, again, if they have a cooperative agreement on file. Incentive funds, one thing I wanted to mention was the prosecutor can spend out of their incentive fund, the clerk can spend out of theirs, but the Title 4D incentive fund is kind of a catch-all. So that's any of the 3 agencies, if they have a valid cooperative agreement, can spend out of the Title 4D fund. It's kind of a catch-all fund that the whole county, or that all of those agencies can use. So what are incentive funds? The other funds that I mentioned, the monthly and the annual reimbursement, those reimbursements generally go back into the county general fund and can be used for any county purpose. Incentive funds, though, can only be used for 4D related expenses. And what do I mean by that? Well, use an example of a copier purchased for a prosecutor's office. If the copier is purchased and it's only going to be used by the child support people, the 4D people in the office, then you could pay 100% of those costs from incentive funds. If the copier is going to be used 50-50 between the 4D and the non-4D function, then you can only use 50% of incentive funds to pay the cost of that copier. And conversely, if it's going to be used by non-4D people, then you can't use incentive funds at all for that copier. So the funds have to be used on a 4D issue for a 4D expense, and it's generally based on the use of whatever that expenditure is. Incentive funds are meant to enhance the child support program at the county level, child support enforcement program at the county level. And so the county is supposed to have a stake in this, and that's what, so most of their budget, the clerk's general fund and the prosecutors and the court's general fund budgets are funded by county levy money, property tax money, and that's the way it's supposed to be. They're supposed to have a stake in it and have a majority of the funding. But the incentive funds can enhance the program, they can supplement the federal or the county spending, but they're not supposed to replace it. And so think of this as an enhancement of the program. And a good example would be if there's a piece of equipment that a 4D department needs, and they're not able to get an additional appropriation or it wasn't budgeted for. So, and if it has a 4D use, then incentive funds is a good use for that money. Maybe you have a 4D court and wants to hire a referee, well, to help expedite the cases. Well, that would be a potential good use for incentive funds. That would enhance the program. Or if you're doing some community outreach and you're doing some advertising and that sort of thing, that would be a possibility for the use of incentive funds. Excuse me. So as you can see, those are expenses that enhance the program. 4D expenditures are unique in that they do, or incentive expenditures are unique in that they don't require county council approval. They don't require appropriation or county council approval. As long as it's a valid 4D expense, then the clerk, prosecutor, or court can spend that for anything that they want. Now, there are a couple exceptions to that. One is you can't raise the salary of an elected official, clerk, or prosecutor using incentive funds without council approval. Or an auditor, you can't spend those funds into the red. So if a prosecutor is spending some incentive funds and that's going to put the fund into the red, the auditor can put the kibosh on that and say, no, I can't do that. Again, with incentive funds, the main auditor function is going to be making sure they go into the right place. These are distributed quarterly to the counties, and so you're going to receive remittance notices again that say quarterly. And if I didn't mention, there's several examples of remittance notices at the back of your sheets, of your handout. But remittance notices, you'll receive those, and then again, it'll say these are incentive funds, this is how much it is, and these are the funds that it goes into. So when I get to the actual auditor's responsibility, I've kind of gone through that already, making sure that the reimbursement money and that the incentive money get into the right fund. That's the main function for the auditors in this regard. Another function is that they need to file quarterly a quarterly incentive balance report. And that is a report that's pretty much what it says. You look each quarter at the balance of the incentive funds in the county each quarter, and you put that information down into the form. It's submitted electronically to Child Support Bureau, and that is information that we keep. The Financial Quality Assurance Group that Lisa and I are a part of, that's pretty much our charter, is monitoring Title 4D expenses throughout the state. Whether it's the monthly reimbursement expenses, the annual cost allocation plan, incentive expenditures by the clerk, prosecutor, and court, or this quarterly incentive balance report. That's what we do, is monitor these expenses throughout the course of the year across the state. That's pretty much all that I had right now. We do have some information on the last page of our handout. It talks about resources. If there's questions or anything going forward, you can see some email addresses there. We also have a nice website called the Child Support Resource, or the CSR as we call it. There's a lot of great information on there, a lot of what I talked about already, incentive expenditures, what you can use it for, what you can claim, how you determine what's eligible for reimbursement. There's also instructions here on this sheet about how you can get access to that portal, the email address, and the information that is required. So if there are any questions, otherwise, thank you very much.